Hello and welcome to your lecture on Chapter 10, The Living Primates. This chapter starts on page 265. So the people who study non-human primates are called primatologists, and it's a branch of anthropology. And they study primates predominantly for two reasons. One is to understand the behavior and ecology of the particular species of primate itself. The other reason is because looking at the similarities and differences between non human primates and humans can give us clues as to human behavior, as well as allowing us to make some inferences about the possible behaviors of our ancestors. Because a lot of our ancestors, if you go back in time far enough, our evolutionary ancestors lived in similar environments and often had similar uh, physical similarities to the non-human primates that we see today. So, in order to study primates, you need to know about the different primates. A lot of this is going to be a repeat from last week's lecture. So, first, we're going to look at the strepsirrhines. The strepsirrhines are the ones that have the wet dog like noses. They have a split that goes through their nose and through their upper lip. They have a snout that is longer than the haplorhines because they're a little more dependent on their sense of smell than the other non human primates. They have fewer muscles in their face. So because they have fewer muscles in their face, they're not capable of as many facial gestures as the other non human primates that we're going to talk about. So a lot of their communication is more sound and or scent based than the other non-human primates. Again, the strepsirrhines are the ones that have the tapetum lucidum in the back of their eye that concentrates the light so they can see better at night. They are the ones that have a grooming claw on the second digit of their rear foot. So they'll do a lot of grooming where it's like a dog where they take their hind foot and they scratch at their fur. They're going to do that same kind of motion. And they have the tooth comb, which is the incisors, their lower incisors that stick out and are all the same length that they use as a comb for their fur. So these are the lemurs and the lorises, galagos, and patos. One of the ones when we're talking about using a more scent-based form of communication, one of the ones I like to talk about are ring-tailed lemurs. Ring-tailed lemurs have scent glands in their shoulder area as well as on their wrists, and they rub their tails against those scent glands to scent them. So one of the activities we see is in ring-tailed lemurs that involves this revolves around breeding behavior when the females come into season. Ring-tailed lemurs live in groups of 20 to 30 individuals, and it is in their best interest to not have a lot of fighting going on, because if males fight each other for access to females, males are going to get injured, and then they're not going to necessarily survive or be healthy enough to help with the rest of the troop. So instead of physically fighting each other, ring-tailed lemurs have evolved what scientists refer to as stink fights. So if there's two males who want to breed with a female, rather than biting or clawing or any of those kind of behaviors, what they'll do is they'll both sit there and they have very long tails. They'll rub their tail against their shoulder and between their wrists, get them all covered with the scent markers from those glands that they have. And then they will turn their backs to each other and wave their tails at each other to throw the stink at the other male. And this can last for up to an hour that they're doing this. And eventually one of them will decide it's not worth his effort or, back off. And then the male that didn't back off is the one that then gets to breed with the female, but nobody gets injured. And their community stays intact in that way. So another type of strepsirrhine, which is actually another type of lemur that we've talked about briefly last week, is the Aye, Aye-Aye. And the Aye is the most highly derived, specialized of all the lemurs. So remember, a derived derived traits are traits that have evolved from what the common ancestor had. They're going to be different than what the common ancestor had. So when you look at the ii, they have a lot of very derived features, most of which revolve around their diet, what their diet is. So this is an animal that eats predominantly insects and predominantly the grubs of insects. So in Madagascar, a lot of the insects lay their eggs like under the tree bark. So the grubs develop under the tree bark of trees. So when you look at an ii, you see an animal that's got very large bat-like ears, and it's got their middle finger is very extensive. It's like twice as long as any of their other fingers, with a claw at the end. And they've got ever growing incisors like a rodent. They're the only primate that has incisors that never stop growing. This is all in favor or in help to their diet, because what they do is they will take that middle finger and they will tap on tree bark, and they're listening with those big ears and they're tapping until they can hear a grub moving around, because the grubs will hear the noise and they'll move, so they can hear the grubs moving under there. Then they take those incisors and they gnaw at the bark until they've got an opening where the grub is. And then they take the claw on the end of that very long finger and they use it like a fishing hook to reach in and grab that grub and pull it out so they can eat it. They need to have their incisors ever growing like a rodent, because that gnawing wears down their incisors. And if they just had normal incisors like other primates, eventually that gnawing they'd have no incisors left. They'd have no front teeth left and no way to get under that bark to get their food anymore. So it's all very derived features that you see in the ii. I am going to have in your Canvas website under pages, there is going to be a page available that has pictures of different primates that I'm talking about. So there's pictures in your book, but I've added extra pictures to get an even better idea of what some of these primates look like. And there is a picture on that page of an ii, so you can see how different it looks from the other lemurs. Then you have the other group, which is the haplorhines. So strepsirrhines and haplorhines are at the same level in the hierarchy of zoology. The haplorhines are the ones with the simpler noses. So think about your nose. There's no split there. They have a continuous upper lip, just like we do. Their muzzles tend to be shorter. These guys are going to be using their sense of sight even more than the lemurs, lorises, patos, and galagos. So the strepsirrhines still are using their sense of smell to an extent. When we get to the haplorhines, it gets less and less, and they become more dependent on their sense of sight, and so their muzzle shortens. The only exception for this is going to be your baboons. Baboons have a pretty hefty sized muzzle, but it has nothing to do with their sense of smell. Baboons, especially the males, have very large canines, both for the males to fight each other for females and as protection against the animals that live in the savannah with them. So baboons are going to still have a muzzle, but most of the haplorhines have a much shorter muzzle than you see with the lemurs, lorises, patos, and galagos. You also find more facial muscles, more differentiated facial muscles in the haplorhines. So they're going to be using more facial gestures in their communication than we saw with the strepsirrhines. The first one we talked about last week as well, is the tarsiers. The tarsiers are a single genus. They're all very small. They're about 6 inches from their head, and their body is only about 6 inches altogether. They are the only primate where their eyeball is bigger than their brain, and this is because they are nocturnal, but they do not have the tapetum lucidum like we saw in the strepsirrhines. The haplorhines do not have a tapetum lucidum, so in order for them to be successful as a nocturnal animal, they've evolved very large eyes to help bring in enough light for them to see at night. And so they have huge eyes compared to their head size. They also have very long hind limbs and specifically their ankle bones. And this is because, and we're going to talk about locomotion more on another class, but these guys are in the category of vertical clingers and leapers. So if my arm was an upright tree trunk or branch, they tend to leap and grab on, so their hind legs and their front legs are holding on, and then they use their back legs as their propulsion to leap off again to the next vertical surface, rather than walking along on all fours on the top of a branch like most of the haplorines that live in the trees. These guys are going to be more vertical, and they're clingers and leapers. And the bone that's the most pronouncedly enlarged in their leg is their tarsal bone, which, if you remember from when we did osteology, that's one of your ankle bones. And that's where their name comes from, tarsal bone, tarsier. So that's helping them to get more propulsion. The other interesting thing about tarsiers is they are the only primate that eats no plant matter at all. These guys are exclusively carnivores. They're eating insects and birds and lizards, no vegetation whatsoever. Generally, they're getting a little bit of plant matter in their diet because when you eat, say, a lizard or a bird that has eaten some plants, they're eating the entire animal, so they're getting the stomach contents, but they're not eating it on its own. Okay. Besides the tarsiers, we then have the platyrrhines, and the platyrrhines are your New World monkeys. Again, these are the guys that are only found in South and Central America up into the southern part of Mexico. These are ones that have, again, they have the dry nose, but their nostrils face sideways. And there's a picture of at least one on that page that really shows the nostrils very well. They have broad noses and the nostrils face sideways. This is the only group of primates where you see the prehensile tail. Only in the platyrrhines can you find a prehensile tail, but not all platyrrhines will have a prehensile tail. So that's all. So when you look at them, you can say all monkeys with a prehensile tail are New World monkeys, but not all New World monkeys will have that prehensile tail. They are all arboreally adapted. Arboreally means to live in the trees, arbor, tree. So you can have arboreally adapted animals and you can have terrestrially adapted animals. Those are the two adaptations that you see in primates. These are all arboreally adapted. And the ones that have a prehensile tail are using it like a fifth limb. A lot of times you'll see pictures of, like, say, spider monkeys who have a prehensile tail hanging from one foot and their tail to get down low enough to get some water, because they don't want to be all the way down on the ground because they're more susceptible to predation if they're all the way down on the ground. So they will hang, say, from a branch over the water to get a drink of water, and they're holding on with one or two hind legs and their tail to be more secure. These guys have thumbs, but they do not have opposable thumbs. So when we have opposable thumbs, it means that we can put it across to our other fingers. The platyrrhines, their thumb is in line with the rest of their fingers. It's longer than our thumb, and it's used to grip over a branch. So their thumb would go with their fingers over the top of a branch when they're gripping a branch, or they're walking. Their thumbs are going to wrap around the branch with their fingers. Another feature that you find in strepsirrhines and the platyrrhines, but not any of the other haplorhine primates, is urine washing. And this is a behavior that they do, that they'll basically pee on their hands and then wipe it on their fur. It signals to the females do it, and it signals to the males when they're sexually receptive. There are pheromones that are, because their hormones are different when they're sexually receptive, and those change the scent of their urine, and it allows the males to smell who is sexually receptive so they can mate with them. So we've got within the haplorhines, we've got the tarsiers and we have the platyrrhines. And then the third category would be the catarrhines. And the catarrhines are going to be your old world monkeys, apes, and humans. So these are the most highly evolved / derived of the non-human primates are going to be the catarrhines. So the biggest challenge, if you're looking just at pictures of non-human primates in a book, is how do you tell a new world monkey from an old world monkey? And the most obvious thing is going to be which way their nostrils point. So the new world monkeys, their nostrils are going to point sideways. Old world monkeys, apes, and humans, our nostrils either point down, or if you look at a gorilla, their nose is more flattened and their nostrils point forward, not to the sides. This is in this group, the catarrhines, you find the most functional opposable thumbs. So you're starting to see much more, instead of just gripping large things like branches, picking up smaller items, so that you can see like baboons picking up grass seeds off the ground. And chimpanzees that have very nimble fingers, they can use them to strip leaves off of a branch and make it into a tool and things like that. And then, of course, we have very, very nimble opposable thumbs with a really fine pincher grip so that we can do small things with our fingers. So this is the group that has the best opposable thumbs. Within this group, you also see a thing called ichthyocallosities. And this is in the old world monkeys and the lesser apes, which are the gibbons and siamangs. And lesser apes are called lesser simply because they're much smaller than the other apes. There's the lesser apes and the great apes, and that division is based not only on when they split off from each other, but also size, because gibbons and siamangs are like 25 pounds or less. And you get up into the great apes and you're talking 150 pounds plus. So there's quite a big size difference. But all of them are tailless. That's why they're called apes, because none of them have tails. So they have gibbons, siamangs, and the old world monkeys have what are called ichthyocallosities. And this is on, if you remember the pelvic bone, you've got the iliac crest on top, you've got the pubis to the front, and at the bottom to the back was the ichthyocallosity. It's kind of when you sit down, that's the part of your bone that's hitting the chair seat when you sit down. So the ischial tuberosity down there, the callosity provides padding to protect that area. And that's because these are all tend to be animals that sit upright while they're eating on very hard surfaces, either the ground or on branches. And that padding provides protection for not only the bone, but for the nerves that run through that area, specifically the sciatic nerve. So if you ever think like if you sit on the ground for too long, sometimes your legs go numb, your feet and your legs fall asleep. Well, if you're an animal out in the wild, you don't want your feet and legs to fall asleep, because what if a lion turns up or a jaguar and wants to eat you, and you can't run very well because your back legs are numb? So that they've evolved these ichthyocallosities to help protect that area so that doesn't happen. On pages 267 and 268 of your book, there are list of visible distinguishing features for the different taxonomic groups of living primates to help you figure out what you're looking at. Okay, so definitely refer back to those pages when you're doing your homework and when it comes to time to take your test.